The Man in the Rain. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour as Mia squinted through the glass, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. What had started as a light drizzle 30 minutes ago had transformed into a biblical deluge, sheets of water cascading down the windshield faster than the wipers could clear them. "I can't see a damn thing," she muttered, leaning forward as if those extra inches might pierce the curtain of water. "Maybe we should pull over," suggested Liam from the passenger seat, his voice tight with concern. "Wait it out. In the middle of nowhere?" Mia shook her head. "We haven't passed a town in an hour." From the back seat, Danny looked up from her phone, the blue light illuminating her face in the darkened car. "No service out here anyway. GPS is still working though." "Barely," added Tyler, who sat beside her, his broad shoulders hunched as he peered out the rain-lashed window. "It keeps glitching." The four college seniors had been planning this road trip for months. A final adventure before graduation scattered them across the country. A week-long journey from Boston to San Francisco, with carefully planned stops at national parks and quirky roadside attractions. Now, somewhere in the vastness of rural Nebraska, their meticulously crafted itinerary was drowning in the unexpected storm. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the empty highway stretching before them. For a moment, everything was stark white: the road, the distant tree line, the sheets of rain. Then darkness again, deeper than before. "Jesus," Liam whispered, blinking away the afterimage. The GPS chimed, its pleasant female voice incongruously calm. "Recalculating route." "What?" Mia frowned at the device mounted on the dashboard. "What? We're on the right road." The blue line on the screen shifted, rerouting them off the highway onto what appeared to be a smaller road ahead. "Possible obstruction detected," the GPS announced. "Alternate route recommended. Turn right in 500 feet. Tyler leaned forward between the front seats. "That's weird. How would it know about an obstruction out here? There's no traffic data. Maybe the highway floods?" Danny suggested, but her tone betrayed her uncertainty. Another flash of lightning illuminated a small, unmarked road branching off to the right. It looked narrower than the highway, bordered by dense trees that loomed like sentinels in the storm. "I don't like it," Liam said. "Doesn't look well traveled." "The highway could be washed out ahead," Mia countered. "I'm not risking it in this weather." She slowed the car, peering through the rain for the turnoff. The headlights caught the reflective edge of a small, weathered sign nearly hidden by overgrown branches. She couldn't make out what it said. "Turn right now," instructed the GPS as they reached the junction. Mia switched on her turn signal, an automatic courtesy despite the empty road, and carefully steered the car onto the narrower path. Immediately, the quality of the road deteriorated. What had appeared to be asphalt from the highway revealed itself as cracked, neglected pavement that hadn't seen maintenance in years. The car jolted over potholes hidden beneath growing puddles. "Great," muttered Mia, slowing to a crawl. "This is definitely not the scenic route I had in mind." "How long are we supposed to be on this road?" asked Danny, leaning forward to look at the GPS. "Calculating," the device responded, the screen flickering. The estimated time of arrival disappeared, replaced by a loading symbol that spun endlessly. "Signal weak. Recalculating." "Perfect," Tyler sighed. "So we're just driving blind now." "We'll hit a main road eventually," Mia said with forced confidence. "It can't go on forever." But as the minutes stretched into a half hour, the road showed no signs of improvement or intersection. The trees pressed closer on either side, creating a claustrophobic tunnel barely wide enough for the car. The rain, if anything, fell harder, drumming on the roof with deafening persistence. "I don't think this is right," Liam said, pulling up another map app on his phone. "I'm not getting any signal, but the last cached map doesn't show any road here at all." "That's impossible," Mia said, though a cold knot of unease had formed in her stomach. "We turned off a major highway. This has to connect to something." The headlights suddenly caught something ahead, a figure standing in the middle of the road. "Shit." Mia slammed on the brakes, the car hydroplaning slightly before grinding to a halt mere feet from the stationary figure. A man stood motionless in their headlights, completely drenched. He wore what might once have been a dark suit, now plastered to his thin frame by the relentless rain. His head was slightly bowed, dark hair hanging in sodden strands that obscured his face. "Oh my God," Danny whispered. "Where did he come from? Middle of nowhere in this storm?" Tyler's voice was tense. "That's not normal." "He could be stranded," Liam suggested. "Maybe his car broke down." The man didn't move, didn't raise his head, didn't acknowledge the car's presence in any way. Just stood there, rain streaming off him, creating ripples in the growing puddle at his feet. Should we help him? Mia asked uncertainly, her hand still gripping the wheel. As if in response, the man slowly raised his head. His face, partially illuminated by the headlights, was gaunt to the point of emaciation, skin stretched taut over sharp cheekbones. But it was his eyes that made Mia's breath catch. They reflected the headlights like an animal's, 2 points of unnatural luminescence in the darkness. "Don't open the doors," Tyler said sharply. "Something's wrong with him." The man took a step toward the car. "Drive around him," Liam urged. "Carefully." Mia swallowed hard, then eased her foot onto the accelerator, steering to the right to give the figure a wide berth. As they passed, all four of them turned to look at him through rain-streaked windows. He never turned his head, but somehow his gaze seemed to follow them, those reflective eyes tracking their movement. "That was creepy as hell," Danny said once they'd put some distance between themselves and the strange figure. "Should we call someone once we get service?" "Look, I don't know, not right." "If we get service," Tyler muttered, still looking back through the rear window. "I don't." He stopped abruptly, his face draining of color. "What?" Mia asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Tyler, what is it?" "Stop the car," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Stop the car right now." Mia pressed on the brake, bringing the vehicle to a gentle stop. "What's wrong?" "Look ahead," Tyler said. In the cone of the headlights, no more than 30 feet ahead of them, stood the same man. Same soaking suit, same posture. But closer now, close enough that they could see water running in rivulets down his face, dripping from his chin like tears. "That's impossible," Liam breathed. "We just passed him. He couldn't have." "Turn around," Danny interrupted, her voice high with fear. Mia turned the car around now. Mia didn't need to be told twice. She executed a 3-point turn on the narrow road, hands shaking as she maneuvered. The headlights swept across the dense trees on either side, momentarily illuminating what might have been faces watching from between the trunks, pale ovals with dark hollows for eyes. But when the light returned, there was only rain-drenched foliage. They faced back the way they had come, the road stretching dark before them. "Go," Tyler urged. "Just go." Mia accelerated, the tires splashing through deepening puddles. The wipers worked frantically, clearing the glass just long enough for her to see a few feet ahead before the rain obscured it again. "Do you see him?" she asked, afraid to take her eyes off the road. "No," Liam answered, peering intently through the windshield. "I think we're..." The car's headlights once again illuminated a figure in the road ahead. "No," Danny moaned. "No, no, no." It was him again. Standing perfectly still despite the punishing rain, waiting for them. But this time, his head was already raised, those luminous eyes fixed directly on them. And he was smiling, a terrible, too-wide grin that stretched his thin face to breaking point. Mia swerved sharply to avoid him, the car fishtailing on the slick pavement. For a terrifying moment, they slid toward the trees, but she managed to regain control, straightening out just in time. "How is he doing that?" she cried, panic rising in her throat. "Where did he come from?" "Just keep driving," Tyler insisted. "Don't stop no matter what." They drove in tense silence for several minutes, everyone scanning the road ahead with dreadful anticipation. The rain seemed to form shapes as it fell, ghostly silhouettes that dissipated when directly observed. "There's a turn," Liam suddenly pointed out, indicating a fork in the road that appeared in their headlights. "Try going left. Maybe we can get away from whatever this is." Mia took the left fork without slowing, desperate for any route that might lead them back to the highway, back to normality. The new road was even narrower, the pavement rougher, but at least it was a change. Their relief was short-lived. The same figure appeared in their headlights, standing at a bend in the road. This time he had one arm raised, index finger extended, pointing directly at the car. "Go back," Danny whimpered. "Try the other fork." Mia executed another turn, speeding back to the junction and taking the right fork instead. Her hands were slick with sweat on the wheel, her heart hammering against her ribs. The GPS suddenly came to life, its screen flickering with static before clearing. "Destination ahead," it announced cheerfully. "Continue straight for point of no return." "What the hell?" Liam grabbed the device, staring at the screen. "That's not what we programmed. That's not." His words died as the road ahead revealed a small clearing where the trees receded slightly. In that open space stood not one but dozens of figures, all identical to the man they'd been encountering, all standing motionless in the downpour, all facing the approaching calm. Mia slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop at the edge of the clearing. Beyond the gathered figures, the road continued, disappearing into darkness. "We can't go that way," she whispered. "We can't go back either," Tyler pointed out, his voice strained. "He's everywhere. We're trapped," Danny said, tears mixing with sweat on her face. "We're trapped here." Liam was staring at the windshield, at the patterns the rain made as it streamed down the glass. "Look," he said slowly. "The raindrops, they're moving wrong." He was right. The rain on the windshield wasn't flowing downward as it should but moving in circular patterns, forming what looked like crude faces that appeared and dissolved in seconds. "The road," Danny suddenly gasped, pointing through the passenger window. "Look at the reflection in the puddles." They all turned to look. The road was now completely flooded, its surface a black mirror that reflected the car's headlights and the surrounding trees. But where their own reflections should have been visible, there were instead dozens of upside-down faces, pale, gaunt faces with reflective eyes and stretched smiles. Tyler made a choked sound, fumbling for the door handle. "We need to get out of here. Now." "No." Mia grabbed his arm. "Don't open the doors. Don't touch the water." As if to validate her warning, one of the reflections in the water moved independently of anything above, an arm reaching upward toward the surface, fingers splayed as if trying to break through from below. "Oh God," Liam whispered. "What is this place?" The GPS screen flickered again, then displayed a simple message: "One stays. The rest may go." "What does that mean?" Danny asked, her voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, a tremendous crash of thunder shook the car, and the downpour intensified to a solid wall of water. Through it, the figures in the clearing began to move, shuffling slowly toward the car with jerky, unnatural movements. "They're coming," Tyler said, his voice tight with terror. "We have to do something." The nearest figure reached the car, pressing a pale hand against Mia's window. Where it touched, the glass frosted over instantly, ice crystals spreading outward in feathery patterns. Through the forming ice, they could see that the man's face was changing. Features shifting, melting, reforming into a face that looked horribly familiar. That's me," Mia gasped, staring at her own features now superimposed on the gaunt face outside. Similar transformations were happening all around the car, each approaching figure morphing to mimic one of them. Dozens of distorted versions of Mia, Liam, Tyler, and Danny pressed against the windows, their expressions twisted in silent screams. "The GPS," Liam said suddenly. "It said one stays, the rest may go. I think the road wants one of us." "That's insane," Tyler argued, but his protest lacked conviction as he watched his own face leering at him from outside. "The road won't let us all leave," Liam continued, his voice oddly calm now. "It needs a new traveler. Like him." He nodded toward the figures surrounding them. "Like all of them." "We're not sacrificing anyone," Mia stated firmly, though her voice shook. "There has to be another way." A crack appeared in the driver's side window, the ice having weakened the glass. Outside, the rain pounded with renewed ferocity as if sensing weakness, seeking entry. "I don't think we have a choice," Liam said softly. "I think if we don't choose, it'll take all of us." "We could try to drive through them," Danny suggested desperately. "Just floor it and hope for the best." Mia nodded, gripping the wheel again. "It's worth a try." She pressed the accelerator to the floor. The tires spun uselessly, kicking up water but finding no traction on the flooded road. The car didn't move an inch. The crack in the window spread, branching out like a lightning bolt across the glass. Similar cracks began to appear in the other windows, the windshield, even the sunroof, the entire car being systematically weakened. "It's going to get in," Tyler said, his voice barely audible. "I'll stay." The three others turned to look at Liam, who had spoken so calmly it took a moment for his words to register. "What?" "No." Mia reached for him, but he had already unbuckled his seatbelt. "It makes sense," he said, his face eerily serene. "I've been sick for months. The headaches, the vision problems. The doctors found something in my brain. Inoperable. I wasn't going to make it to the end of the year anyway." "Liam, you never said," Danny began, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want to ruin our last trip together," he said with a sad smile. "But now I can make it mean something. I can save you." "We're not leaving you here," Mia insisted, grabbing his arm. The driver's window finally shattered, icy rain and grasping hands immediately reaching inside. Mia screamed as cold fingers brushed her skin. Liam wrenched free of her grip and lunged across her, pushing the invading arms back. "Start the car again," he shouted over the howling wind that now filled the vehicle. "When I go out, drive. Don't look back. "Don't ever come this way again." Before any of them could stop him, he hit the door lock, shoved the door open against the press of bodies, and threw himself out into the storm. The effect was immediate. The hands withdrew. The press of bodies around the car receded. The rain, while still heavy, no longer seemed animated by malevolent purpose. "Liam!" Mia screamed, trying to see through the broken window, but all she could make out were shadowy figures retreating into the darkness, dragging someone with them. The GPS chimed once more, route recalculated. Continue straight to return to highway. "We can't leave him," Danny sobbed. "We can't." "I don't think he's there anymore," Tyler said quietly, staring out at the now empty road. "I don't think any of them are." Mia's hands shook as she restarted the engine. The car moved freely now, the tires finding purchase where before there had been none. With one last desperate look into the darkness where Liam had disappeared, she put the car in drive and pressed the accelerator. The road ahead was clear, the storm already beginning to slacken. Within minutes, they could see the welcoming lights of the highway in the distance. None of them spoke as they rejoined normal traffic, as the GPS recalculated their route to San Francisco, as the rain finally stopped and stars appeared in the clearing sky. What was there to say? What words could possibly encompass the horror of what they had experienced, what they had done? 3 weeks later, long after they had returned to Boston, after they had attended a funeral for Liam where they told no one the truth of his passing, Mia received a postcard in the mail. It had no return address, no message, just a picture of a rain-soaked road at night and a single set of coordinates written in familiar handwriting. When she looked up the location, she felt ice form in her veins. It was another stretch of highway, thousands of miles from where they had lost Liam, but unmistakably connected. That night, it began to rain in Boston. And as Mia looked out her apartment window at the wet streets below, she caught a glimpse of a familiar figure standing under a streetlight. A gaunt man in a dark suit, his face obscured by the downpour, one arm raised to point directly at her window. The road had found her again. And this time she knew it would not be satisfied with just one traveler. The last gas station. Rain pelted the windshield in violent sheets, the wipers struggling to keep pace against the downpour. Emma leaned forward in the passenger seat, straining to see through the wall of water. The headlights carved twin tunnels of visibility into the darkness, but beyond their reach was nothing but black emptiness, as if the world simply ended a few feet ahead of them. "We need to stop," she said, glancing at the fuel gauge. The needle hovered dangerously close to empty, a situation that had been causing her mounting anxiety for the last 20 minutes. "We're running on fumes, Jake." Jake's knuckles whitened against the steering wheel. 6 hours into their cross-country drive, fatigue had settled into his bones, and the relentless drumming of rain wasn't helping. "There's supposed to be a town soon," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. The GPS had lost signal an hour ago, leaving them to navigate by the old paper map Emma had insisted on bringing, a decision he'd initially mocked but now silently blessed. "Soon isn't going to cut it," Emma replied, tracing a finger along the map illuminated by her phone's flashlight. "We're here, somewhere between absolute nowhere and complete desolation." As if responding to her words, a flickering light appeared in the distance, cutting through the curtain of rain. Drawing closer, they could make out the faint outline of a neon sign. "There," Emma said, relief evident in her voice. "A gas station. See, your girlfriend's always right." Jake managed a tired smile. Yeah, let's just hope it's open." The sign came into view, "Last Chance Gas," the letters buzzing and flickering in the storm, casting intermittent red light across the rain-slicked pavement. Below it, a smaller sign promised 24-hour service, though the decrepit appearance of the single pump station suggested otherwise. Jake pulled in, tires crunching over gravel and splashing through puddles. The station was small, just a single pump island and a tiny convenience store with clouded windows. No other vehicles were visible. The building looked like it had been standing since the 1950s, its paint peeling and faded to an indeterminate color somewhere between gray and beige. "Charming," Emma murmured, peering through the rain at the dilapidated structure. "Very Texas Chainsaw Massacre." "Don't," Jake warned, though he couldn't help but feel the same unease. "Let's just get gas and get out of here." They sat for a moment, watching the rain hammer against the windshield, neither particularly eager to step out into the deluge. Finally, Jake sighed and reached for the door handle. "I'll pump. You can stay dry." "My hero," Emma smiled, squeezing his arm. "I'll see if they have any snacks that won't give us food poisoning." Jake braced himself and dashed through the rain to the pump. It was an older model, the kind that still had mechanical dials rather than a digital display. He lifted the nozzle, selected the grade, and began filling the tank, hunching his shoulders against the icy rain that soaked through his jacket within seconds. Inside the store, Emma pushed open the door, triggering a tinny bell. The interior was dimly lit by flickering fluorescent tubes that cast everything in a sickly greenish hue. Shelves lined the walls, sparsely stocked with dusty cans and packages. A glass refrigerator hummed loudly in the corner, containing a few bottles of soda and water. Behind a counter stood an old man, so still that Emma initially thought he was a mannequin. His skin was deeply wrinkled, stretched taut over sharp cheekbones, and his eyes, when they suddenly shifted to focus on her, were sunken deep into their sockets, dark and unnervingly alert. "Evening," Emma offered, trying to mask her discomfort with politeness. The old man didn't return the greeting. He simply watched her with those hollow eyes as she navigated the narrow aisles, selecting a few packaged snacks and bottles of water. When she approached the counter, he finally spoke, his voice a dry rasp, like autumn leaves skittering across pavement. "You're a long way from anywhere." Emma nodded, setting her items on the counter. "Just passing through. Heading to Philadelphia." The old man's gaze flipped to the window where Jake could be seen placing the pump. "Bad night to be on the road." "Tell me about it," Emma agreed. "But we've got a schedule to keep." The man began ringing up her purchases with deliberate slowness. His hands were liver-spotted and gnarled, the joints swollen with arthritis, but they moved with surprising precision. "That'll be $14.72, he said, then added, "plus whatever the pump says." Outside, Jake finished filling the tank and jogged through the rain to the store entrance, bringing with him a gust of cold, wet air as he opened the door. 22 even on pump 1, he announced, shaking water from his hair. The old man nodded, calculating the total. As Jake approached the counter and reached for his wallet, the attendant suddenly grabbed his wrist. Jake flinched, startled by the unexpected contact and the surprising strength in those bony fingers. "Listen to me," the old man said, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "You've got about 40 miles to the next town. Whatever happens, don't stop again until you reach it. Even if someone is on the road. Even if they look hurt. You understand?" Jake and Emma exchanged uncomfortable glances. "I'm serious," the attendant continued, his grip tightening. "This stretch of highway, it plays tricks. Especially on nights like this." He nodded toward the rain-lashed windows. "You see something, anything, you keep driving. No matter what." "Sure, okay," Jake said, gently extracting his wrist from the man's grasp. He placed the money on the counter. "Thanks for the advice." The old man's expression remained grave as he accepted the cash. "Don't thank me. Just remember what I said." He handed Emma the bag of snacks. "And pray you make it to the city before dawn." Back in the car, Jake started the engine and cranked up the heater, trying to chase away the chill that had settled into his bones. A chill that wasn't entirely due to the rain. "Well, that was sufficiently creepy," Emma said, buckling her seatbelt. "I feel like we just experienced the opening scene of every horror movie ever." Jake forced a laugh. "Right? Don't stop even if someone looks hurt. Classic." "What do you think he meant about the highway playing tricks?" Jake shrugged, pulling back onto the road. "Probably just trying to scare the city folk. Or he's not all there. Did you see how old he was? Probably been alone out here too long." Emma nodded, but a sense of unease had taken root in her chest. She glanced back at the gas station receding in the side mirror, the neon sign growing smaller until it was just a red pinprick in the darkness, then nothing at all. The highway stretched before them, a black ribbon glistening under the relentless downpour. The car's headlights seemed dimmer now, struggling to penetrate the wall of rain. They drove in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the pounding of rain on the roof. "Maybe we should have waited out the storm," Emma said finally, voicing the thought that had been nagging at her. "This is getting worse." Jake shook his head. "We've already lost time with that detour earlier. If we want to make Philadelphia by tomorrow night, we need to keep going." Emma didn't argue. She knew he was right, but something about the old man's warning had unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She turned her attention to her phone, trying to regain GPS signal, but the screen showed only the dreaded no service indicator. "Still no signal," she muttered. "Can you believe it? It's 2025, and there are still dead zones like this." Jake didn't respond. His focus was on the road, on maintaining control of the car as wind gusts occasionally tried to push them off course. The rain, if anything, had intensified, creating a hypnotic pattern against the windshield that made it difficult to maintain concentration. Jake, Emma said suddenly, sitting upright. Look. At the edge of their headlights' reach, something was moving on the shoulder of the road. As they drew closer, the shape resolved into a human figure, crawling out of the ditch that ran alongside the highway. One arm was raised, waving desperately. Oh my God, Emma gasped. Someone's hurt. We need to stop. Jake's hands tightened on the wheel. The old man's warning echoed in his mind. Even if someone is on the road. Even if they look hurt. Jake, Emma insisted, her voice rising. They need help. The old man said not to stop, Jake reminded her, his eyes fixed on the approaching figure. Something about its movement seemed off. The way it dragged itself from the ditch was unnatural, almost mechanical, like a marionette with half its strings cut. You can't be serious, Emma said. We can't just leave someone stranded in this storm. The figure was fully visible now, a person. Jake couldn't tell if it was a man or woman, in dark, sodden clothing, crawling onto the shoulder of the road. Their head was bowed, face hidden, but one arm continued to wave frantically. Please, Emma begged, her hand already on the door handle. What if it were one of us out there? Jake hesitated, his foot hovering over the brake pedal. The crawling figure was close now, just yards away. Something deep in his gut was screaming at him to keep driving, an instinct he couldn't explain or rationalize. I'm sorry, he said, both to Emma and the stranded person, and pressed down on the accelerator instead. Jake. Emma cried as they sped past the figure. She twisted in her seat, looking back through the rear window. I can't believe you just did that. The old man was very specific, Jake said, his voice tight. And there was something wrong about that person. Didn't you see it? I saw someone who needed our help, Emma retorted, still craning her neck to see behind them. And now they're gone. We left them in this storm. Jake checked the rearview mirror. The road behind them was empty, no sign of the crawling figure. A small part of him was relieved, but guilt gnawed at his conscience. Had he just abandoned someone in genuine need because of some cryptic warning from a strange old man? If we see a police car or another gas station, we'll report it, he promised. But I'm not stopping on this road. Not tonight. Emma turned away from him, staring out her window in angry silence. Jake focused on driving, trying to ignore the growing tension between them. The rain continued its assault, occasional lightning flashes illuminating the landscape. Barren fields on either side of the highway, no houses or buildings in sight. After about 15 minutes of uncomfortable silence, Emma spoke again, her voice barely audible above the storm. Jake, there's someone on the road. He squinted through the windshield. Another figure had appeared in their headlights, this one standing in the middle of their lane. Unlike the previous one, this person was upright, arms outstretched as if to stop the car. It's the same person, Emma whispered, her earlier anger replaced by confusion. How did they get ahead of us? Jake slowed slightly but didn't stop. As they drew closer, he could make out more details. It was indeed similar to the figure they'd passed earlier. Same dark clothing, same general build. But something was different. The posture was wrong, the limbs bent at angles that human joints shouldn't allow. That's not possible, Jake muttered. We've been driving at 60 miles an hour. No one could have gotten ahead of us on foot. The figure remained motionless as they approached, face still obscured, but its arms were extended in a way that seemed almost pleading. Jake tightened his grip on the wheel, prepared to swerve around it. Don't stop, he reminded himself aloud. The old man said don't stop. Jake. Emma's voice was tight with fear now. Something's wrong with them. Look at their arms. The figure's limbs seemed to elongate as they watched, stretching beyond normal human proportions. Its head tilted at an impossible angle, nearly touching its shoulder. Jake's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't right. This wasn't possible. He swerved wide around the figure, accelerating as they passed it. In his peripheral vision, he thought he saw its head rotate to follow their movement, not turning naturally but spinning like an owl's, a full 180 degrees. Did you see that? Emma whispered, her face pale in the dim light of the dashboard. Tell me you saw that. Jake nodded, too disturbed to speak. His earlier skepticism was evaporating rapidly, replaced by a deep, primal fear. The old man's warning no longer seemed like the ramblings of an isolated eccentric. They drove faster now, the speedometer pushing 70 despite the dangerous conditions. Neither spoke, both scanning the road ahead with renewed vigilance. The rain continued unabated, lightning occasionally casting the landscape in stark relief. There. Emma pointed ahead. Again. For the third time, a figure appeared in their headlights. This one was crawling again, but not from the ditch, It was in the middle of the road on all fours like an animal. As they drew closer, it raised its head. "Oh God," Emma moaned, pressing back against her seat. The face was a blur, features indistinct and shifting, as if someone had taken an eraser to it, leaving behind only a smudge of darkness where eyes and mouth should be. Yet somehow they both knew it was staring directly at them. "This isn't happening," Jake muttered, knuckles white on the steering wheel. "This can't be real." He swerved around the crawling thing, refusing to look directly at it. Emma had covered her eyes, unable to bear the sight. As they passed, the radio suddenly came to life, though Jake hadn't touched it. Static blared from the speakers, occasionally broken by what sounded like whispered words in a language neither of them recognized. Jake jabbed at the power button, but the static continued. "Turn off," he shouted, slapping the dashboard in frustration and fear. The static abruptly ceased, leaving behind a silence more unsettling than the noise had been. "How much further to the town?" Emma asked, her voice small and frightened. Jake glanced at the odometer. The old man said 40 miles. "We've gone about 25. Maybe 15 more minutes if I keep up this speed." "Okay," Emma nodded, drawing a deep breath. "Okay, we can make it. Just don't stop." The words had barely left her mouth when the engine coughed, the car lurching slightly. "No," Jake whispered, a new fear gripping him. "No, no, no." The engine coughed again and the dashboard lights flickered. The car began to lose speed. "What's happening?" Emma asked, panic edging into her voice. "We just got gas." "I don't know," Jake said, fighting to keep his own panic in check. He pressed harder on the accelerator, but the car continued to slow. It shouldn't be doing this. The engine gave one final, sputtering gasp before dying completely. The headlights dimmed, then went out, plunging them into darkness broken only by the faint glow of the dashboard. Momentum carried them forward a few more yards before the car rolled to a stop in the middle of the empty highway. For a long moment, they sat in silence, listening to the rain hammer against the roof and the tick of the cooling engine. "Try to restart it," Emma finally said, her voice barely audible. Jake turned the key. The starter motor whined weakly but failed to catch. He tried again with the same result. "This doesn't make any sense," he said. "The radio station that knows your name." Rain lashed against the windshield in hypnotic sheets, the wipers struggling to keep pace as they carved temporary arcs of visibility before the darkness closed in again. The headlights of Alex's Honda Civic cut a pale tunnel through the night, illuminating the twisting mountain road ahead and the sheets of water cascading down the steep rock face to their right. Beyond the guardrail to their left, there was nothing but blackness, a sheer drop into the valley below. "How much farther?" Megan asked from the passenger seat, her face ghostly in the glow of her phone. The blue light highlighted the dark circles under her eyes and the tension in her jaw. She'd been the first to volunteer to drive when they left the conference 6 hours ago, and now it was nearing 2 a.m. "GPS says we've still got about an hour and a half," Alex replied, leaning forward to peer through the rain-streaked windshield. "But that's assuming we don't run into any more delays." From the back seat, Darren groaned. "Remind me again why we didn't just stay another night at the hotel? I'd be in a warm bed right now instead of trapped in car purgatory." "Because some of us have jobs to get back to," Megan said, not bothering to hide her irritation. She twisted in her seat to face him. "And don't act like you were the only one who wanted to leave. You were practically shoving us out the door after that awkward thing with what's her name." "Melissa," Darren said, his voice suddenly quiet. "Her name was Melissa." "Whatever," Megan said, turning back to face the front. "The point is we all agreed to leave tonight. And now we all have to deal with it." An uncomfortable silence filled the car, broken only by the rhythmic thump of the wipers and the steady drumming of rain on the roof. Alex's eyes burned from fatigue and he blinked hard, trying to focus. The white line marking the edge of the road wavered and blurred, and he felt the car drift slightly before he corrected. "Hey man, you okay?" Darren asked, leaning forward between the front seats. "You want me to take over?" "No, I'm good," Alex said quickly, though the truth was he was struggling to stay awake. The monotony of the road, the darkness, the steady beat of the rain, it was all conspiring to lull him into a dangerous stupor. "But maybe we could find some music or something. This silence is killing me." "On it," Megan said, reaching for the radio. She pressed the power button and was immediately met with a burst of static that filled the car like television snow. She winced and quickly turned the volume down before beginning to scan through the stations. "Latest weather update for the greater static. Buy one get one free this weekend only at static. Remember that the truth is out there folks and they don't want you to static." There's never anything good on the radio at this hour, Darren complained. Just put on a playlist or something. My phone's almost dead, Megan replied, still scanning. And I forgot my charger at the hotel. Of course you did, Darren muttered. Alex ignored their bickering, focusing on keeping the car steady as they rounded a particularly sharp curve. The road here was treacherous enough in daylight. At night, in this rain, it was downright dangerous. He'd driven this route dozens of times before, but never in conditions like this. Suddenly, through the static, a voice emerged with unexpected clarity. Night, dear listeners. You're tuned to 87.9 FM, WQS, broadcasting from the heart of the mountains. It's 2:17 a.m. and you're listening to The Night Shift. I'm your host and I'll be with you through these dark, lonely hours. The voice was male, deep and resonant, with a slight echo that gave it an otherworldly quality. There was something about it that made Alex's skin prickle, though he couldn't say why. That's weird, Megan said, frowning at the display. 87.9 isn't even a real FM frequency. Probably just a community station, Darren said with a shrug. They pop up all over these remote areas. If by some miracle you're out on the roads tonight, the voice continued, I don't envy you. It's coming down in biblical proportions out there. Perfect weather for staying home with a good book and a hot drink. Or, if you're like our three friends currently making their way through Blackwater Pass, perfect weather for white-knuckling it and praying your headlights don't give out. Alex's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Did he just say, Blackwater Pass? Megan finished, her voice barely above a whisper. That's where we are. Coincidence? Darren said quickly, though he too had gone still in the back seat. It has to be. How many people do you think are driving through here tonight? Not many, Alex replied, unable to keep the unease from his voice. We haven't passed another car in over an hour. The radio host chuckled, the sound oddly distorted, as if coming from much further away than the speakers should allow. You're probably wondering how I know where you are. Don't worry, all will be revealed in time. For now, let's set the mood with some music, shall we? This one's for our road-weary travelers. A little something to keep you alert. The radio transitioned to music, a slow, melancholy piano piece that Alex didn't recognize. The notes seemed to hang in the air like the suspended moment before a fall. Okay, this is officially creeping me out, Megan said, reaching to change the station. Wait, Darren said suddenly. I want to hear what else he says. Are you serious? Megan turned to look at him incredulously. This isn't funny, Darren. If this is some kind of prank. It's not, Darren insisted. I swear. I'm just as freaked out as you are. Both of you calm down, Alex said, though his own heart was racing. It's probably just, I don't know, some weird local thing. Or maybe we misheard. The piano piece faded out and the host's voice returned. Welcome back, dear listeners. I hope you enjoyed that little interlude. Now, let's check in on our travelers, shall we? Alex is driving, steady hands on the wheel, doing his best to stay alert despite the fatigue. Megan's in the passenger seat, anxious and irritable after a long day. And Darren, poor Darren, nursing a wounded ego in the back after that embarrassing encounter with Melissa at the conference. Quite the trio, aren't they? The car went deadly silent. Even the rain seemed to pause for a moment. How? Megan began, her voice trembling. How does he know our names? Turn it off, Alex said, his mouth suddenly dry. Turn it off now. Megan lunged for the radio, but before her fingers could reach the dial, the host spoke again. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Megan. You might not like what happens if you try to tune me out. Megan froze, her hand hovering inches from the radio. That's better, the voice purred. Now, where were we? Ah, yes. I was just about to tell you about the history of this lovely little stretch of road you're on. Did you know that in the past 30 years, there have been 17 fatal accidents on Blackwater Pass? 17 souls lost to the darkness and the rain. Some say on nights like this, you can still hear their screams carried on the wind. This isn't happening, Alex muttered, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. This can't be happening. Oh, but it is, Alex, the voice replied as if it had heard him. It very much is. And it's about to get so much worse. The headlights flickered once, twice, and then stabilized. Alex felt his heart skip a beat. Just a coincidence, Darren whispered from the back seat, but he didn't sound convinced. You're coming up on a sharp bend now, the voice continued. The guardrail to your left is rusted through in places. Did you know that? Budget cuts. They were supposed to replace it 2 years ago. Never got around to it. One good impact and it would give way like paper. And that's quite a drop beyond, isn't it? 600 feet straight down to the rocks below. As if on cue, they approached exactly the curve the host had described. Alex slowed the car to a crawl, hyper-aware of the precipitous drop to their left and the voices warning about the guardrail. "You should have taken the last exit," the host said, his voice taking on a sing-song quality that made Alex's skin crawl. "Route 16 would have been longer but safer. Too late now though. There's only one way this trip ends." Something dark darted across the road ahead. A deer or maybe just a shadow trick of the rain. Alex swerved instinctively, the car fishtailing on the wet asphalt. Megan screamed as they skidded toward the guardrail. Alex fought the wheel, heart pounding in his ears, and managed to bring the car back under control just before they hit the barrier. They came to a stop in the middle of the road, the engine idling, all three of them breathing hard. "Jesus Christ," Darren gasped from the back seat. "That was close." From the radio the host laughed, a sound like crumpling metal and breaking glass. "Closer than you think. But we're not quite at the grand finale yet. We have a few more twists and turns before we reach the end of our program." "Fuck this," Megan said and reached for the radio again, this time hitting the power button hard. The radio went silent, but only for a moment. Then it cracked back to life, the host's voice now distorted, as if speaking through water. "I told you not to do that, Megan. Actions have consequences, you know. Let me demonstrate." The headlights suddenly went out, plunging the road ahead into absolute darkness. At the same moment, the engine sputtered and died, leaving them stranded on the dark, rain-soaked road. "No, no, no." Alex turned the key frantically, but the engine wouldn't catch. "Come on, start. Please start." The radio crackled with static, the host's laughter bleeding through like a distant nightmare. "Technical difficulties, I'm afraid. Don't worry though. Help is coming. It's just not the kind of help you're hoping for." The next hour unfolded like a waking nightmare. Their phones showed no signal. Not surprising given their remote location, but terrifying in their current circumstances. The rain continued to pound the roof of the car, and occasional gusts of wind rocked them gently, a reminder of how vulnerable they were on the exposed mountain road. They tried everything they could think of to restart the car, but the battery seemed completely dead. Darren even braved the storm to check under the hood, but returned soaking wet and no wiser about what was wrong. The radio remained their only connection to the outside world, and the mysterious host seemed to take sadistic pleasure in narrating their growing panic. "Look at them now, listeners," he said, his voice clear despite the static that occasionally interrupted the broadcast. "Three friends trapped in a metal box on the edge of oblivion. The darkness pressing in. The rain washing away any hope of rescue. What do you think they're feeling right now? Fear? Desperation? Or maybe something deeper? The creeping realization that some things in this world cannot be explained by logic or reason. We need to get out of here," Megan said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "We need to start walking. There was a gas station back at that last exit, maybe 10 miles back." 10 miles in this weather? Darren shook his head. "We'd be soaked through in minutes. Hypothermia would set in before we made it halfway." "So what's your brilliant plan?" Megan snapped. "Just sit here and listen to creepy radio guy until we run out of air?" "We won't run out of air," Alex said, trying to be the voice of reason though his own fear was mounting. "But Darren's right, we can't walk out of here, not in this weather, not at night. Our best bet is to wait until morning or until someone drives by." "And what if no one drives by?" Megan asked, her voice rising. "What if we're stuck here all night with whatever this is?" She gestured at the radio, which continued to emit an eerie blend of static and the host's voice. "They're arguing now," the host said, his tone mockingly sympathetic. "Tensions rising as the night wears on. It's always the same, isn't it? Put humans in a pressure cooker and watch as their civilized veneer cracks and peels away. What lurks beneath, I wonder? What darkness hides in the hearts of our three friends?" "Shut up," Darren suddenly shouted at the radio. "Just shut the hell up." The host laughed, the sound sending ice down Alex's spine. "Such anger, Darren. Is it me you're angry at? Or yourself, perhaps? For the way you treated Melissa? For the lies you've been telling your friends? For the secret you've been keeping all these years?" Darren went very still, his face draining of color. "What's he talking about?" Megan asked, turning to look at him. "Nothing," Darren said quickly. "He's just trying to mess with our heads." "Oh, but it's not nothing, is it, Darren?" the host continued. "Should I tell them? Should I tell them what really happened that night 3 years ago on this very road?" Alex felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold seeping into the car. "Darren? What is he talking about?" Darren's eyes were wide, fixed on the radio as if it were a venomous snake about to strike. "He can't know about that," he whispered. "Nobody knows about that." "I know everything, Darren," the host said, his voice now barely above a whisper yet somehow perfectly audible. "I know about the car that ran off the road. I know about the young woman behind the wheel. I know you saw her headlights go over the edge, and I know you kept driving. You didn't stop. You didn't call for help. You just drove away. Is that true?" Megan asked, her voice hollow with disbelief. Darren's face crumpled, tears welling in his eyes. "I was drunk," he confessed, the words seemingly torn from him. "I just broken up with Sarah and I was a mess. I shouldn't have been driving, but I was, and then I saw this car coming the other way and it was swerving all over the road. I moved over as far as I could, but they overcorrected and just went over the edge. I saw the taillights disappear into the darkness." "And you didn't stop?" Alex asked, feeling sick. "I couldn't," Darren said, his voice breaking. "I had a suspended license already. I was drunk. I panicked. I told myself someone else would come along, someone else would see and call for help. I told myself there was no way anyone could have survived that fall anyway." "But you don't know that, do you, Darren?" the host interjected. "You don't know for certain she died right away. Perhaps she survived the initial impact. Perhaps she spent hours trapped in that wreckage, bleeding out slowly, praying for a rescue that never came." "Stop it," Darren sobbed, covering his ears. "Please stop." "Her name was Jessica Collins," the host continued remorselessly. "She was 24 years old. She had just received a promotion at work. She was driving home to share the good news with her parents. And you left her to die alone in the dark." The car filled with the sound of Darren's broken sobs, the guilt he'd carried for 3 years finally overwhelming him. "Why are you doing this?" Alex demanded of the radio. "What do you want from us?" "Want?" the host repeated as if amused by the question. "I don't want anything, Alex. I'm merely the messenger, the observer, the chronicler of your journey. But perhaps there's something you want? Something you need to confess as well?" Alex felt his blood run cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No?" The host's voice had taken on a mocking tone. "Nothing you want to share with your friends? No dark secrets eating away at your conscience? No hidden feelings you've been too afraid to acknowledge?" The air in the car seemed to grow thick, oppressive. Alex could feel Megan's eyes on him, questioning. "Don't listen to him," Alex said, not meeting her gaze. "He's just trying to divide us." "Always the rational one, aren't you, Alex?" the host said. "Always the one in control. Except you're not in control now, are you? You're at my mercy. At the mercy of the night, the rain, the mountain. At the mercy of your own secrets." A distant rumble of thunder punctuated the host's words, making them all jump. "We need to get out of this car," Megan said suddenly, her hand already on the door handle. "Megan, wait," Alex began, but she was already pushing the door open, letting in a gust of wind and rain. "I can't breathe in here," she said, stepping out into the downpour. "I can't think with that thing talking." Alex and Darren exchanged glances, then reluctantly followed her out into the storm. The rain hit like ice needles, soaking them instantly. The wind howled around them, threatening to knock them off their feet. In the distance, lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the twisted road ahead and the sheer drop to their left. And still, somehow they could hear the radio, the host's voice carrying through the open car door, unnaturally clear despite the storm. "Look at them now, listeners. 3 souls bare to the elements, their secrets laid bare as well. What will they do next, I wonder? Will they confront the truths they've been hiding? Or will they run from them as they've been doing all their lives? We need to keep moving," Alex shouted over the wind. "There's got to be shelter somewhere ahead." They began walking, huddled together against the driving rain, using the glow of Darren's phone flashlight to guide them. The beam seemed pitifully inadequate against the vast darkness surrounding them. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 15 minutes, they spotted a small turnout ahead with what appeared to be an old scenic overlook shelter. Just a simple roof supported by wooden posts, but it would provide some respite from the rain. As they approached, Alex felt a growing sense of unease. There was something familiar about this place, something that nagged at the edges of his memory. And then he saw it, illuminated briefly by another flash of lightning. A small memorial plaque mounted on a stone at the edge of the overlook. A memorial to a young woman who had gone off the road at this very spot 3 years ago. Jessica Collins. "No," Alex whispered, stopping in his tracks. "This can't be happening." "What?" Megan asked, following his gaze. "What is it?" Before Alex could answer, a sound cut through the howl of the wind, the crackle of a radio coming from within the shelter. As they watched in horror, a figure stepped out from beneath the roof, silhouetted against the darkness. "Welcome," said a voice they recognized all too well, though it was no longer coming through a car radio but from the mouth of the figure before them. "I've been waiting for you." Lightning flashed again, revealing the face of the figure, or rather, the lack of one. Where features should have been, there was only a swirling darkness, like static on an old television screen. Megan screamed, the sound quickly swallowed by the wind. Darren fell to his knees, whether in terror or supplication, it was hard to tell. Alex stood frozen, unable to move, unable to speak as the figure, the host, approached them with slow, deliberate steps. "Do you understand now?" it asked, its voice somehow both all around them and coming from deep inside their own heads. "Do you see why I brought you here? Why I called to you through the radio waves, drew you to this place? What are you?" Alex managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. The figure tilted its head, the void where its face should be seeming to study him. "I am many things. I am the voice in the darkness. I am the witness to your crimes. I am the judge, the jury, and, if necessary, the executioner." It turned to Darren, who was still kneeling, rain streaming down his face, mingling with his tears. "You left her to die," it said, its voice now holding an edge of cold fury. "You drove away and tried to forget. But the mountain remembers. The night remembers. I remember." "I'm sorry," Darren sobbed. "God, I'm so sorry." "Sorry isn't enough," the figure said. "Justice demands more than words. It demands atonement." It reached out toward Darren with a hand that seemed composed of darkness and rain, of radio static and mountain mist. Darren cried out, a sound of pure terror that cut through Alex like a knife. And then, over the howl of the wind and the pounding of the rain, they heard something else, the distant wail of a siren. The figure paused, its head turning toward the sound. For a moment, it seemed to ripple like a bad television signal. "It seems our broadcast will be interrupted," it said, its voice fading in and out like a radio losing reception. "But don't worry, listeners. We'll be back, after these messages." And then it was gone, dissolving into the rain and darkness as if it had never been there at all. Moments later, the flashing lights of a highway patrol car appeared around the bend, its headlights cutting through the night like a lifeline thrown to drowning swimmers. The officer who found them, soaking wet, shivering, and babbling about a radio broadcast and a faceless figure, clearly thought they were suffering from hypothermia-induced hallucinations. He radioed for an ambulance and helped them into his warm patrol car while they waited. "You folks are lucky I came along when I did," he said, handing them scratchy emergency blankets from his trunk. "Nobody uses this road much anymore, not since they opened the new highway. I only patrol it once a night." "Our car," Alex began, still shaking from cold and fear. "It died back there on the road. We'll get a tow truck out in the morning," the officer assured him. "Right now, my concern is getting you through checked out. You've been exposed to these elements for too long." "There was a radio broadcast," Megan tried to explain, her words tumbling out too fast. "It knew things about us. It knew our names. And then there was this figure at the overlook." The officer's expression was kind but skeptical. "The storm plays tricks on your mind," he said gently. "And these mountains, well, they have a way of bringing out people's fears." They fell silent, too exhausted and traumatized to argue. But as the officer turned to check his radio, Darren leaned forward. "The overlook back there," he said quietly. "There was a memorial plaque. For a woman named Jessica Collins. Was that real?" The officer's face changed, a flash of recognition crossing his features. "Yes," he said slowly. "Jessica Collins. Tragic accident 3 years back. Her car went off the road during a storm not unlike this one. By the time we found her, it was too late." "Was there ever?" Darren hesitated, struggling to form the words. "Was there ever any suggestion that another vehicle might have been involved? That someone might have seen it happen and not reported it?" The officer studied him for a long moment. "There was some evidence that another car might have been present, yes. Tire marks on the road suggested she might have swerved to avoid something. But we never found any witnesses." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Why do you ask?" Before Darren could respond, the radio on the officer's dashboard crackled to life. "Night, dear listeners. You're tuned to 87.9 FM, WQS, broadcasting from the heart of the mountains. It's 3:42 a.m. and you're listening to The Night Shift. I'm your host and I'll be with you through these dark, lonely hours." The officer frowned, reaching to adjust the dial. "That's odd. There's no station at that frequency." Alex, Megan, and Darren exchanged looks of pure horror as that voice, continued. We had to take a brief break in our programming, but we're back now with the conclusion of tonight's story. And what a story it's been, hasn't it, listeners? Full of fear, guilt, confession. But not yet justice. Not yet atonement. But don't worry. There's still time for one final twist before the night is through. After all. The voice paused, and in that moment, Alex could have sworn he saw something in the rearview mirror. A swirling darkness where a face should be static given form. There's only one way this trip ends. As if on cue, the patrol car's headlights flickered once, twice, and then went out, plunging them back into darkness. The sour tang of stale coffee lingered in Ethan's mouth as he pulled his 18-wheeler into the deserted rest stop. 3 a.m. and still 500 miles to go before Denver. His eyelids felt like sandpaper, scraping against his eyeballs with every blink. The company's deadline wasn't just tight, it was crushing. But that's what happened when you were the new guy, the one desperate enough to take the routes nobody else wanted. Just a quick break, Ethan muttered to himself, killing the engine. The sudden silence pressed against his ears, a physical presence in the cab. Outside, nothing moved except the occasional moth fluttering desperately against the harsh fluorescent lights that illuminated the empty parking lot. Stretching his cramped legs, he grabbed his phone. The trucking forums had become his only real companion on these endless overnight hauls. Anonymous usernames sharing road conditions, warning about speed traps, or just shooting the breeze, these virtual strangers had become something like friends. Scrolling through various threads, his thumb paused on one that looked different. Unlike the others, it hadn't been active for years until someone bumped it just hours ago. The title stood out in stark, capitalized letters. Do not reply to this post. Do not stop on Route 56. Ha! Ethan snorted, clicking through. Probably some overdramatic warning about highway patrol or road work. The original post was dated from 11 years ago. The username was LastDriver78, and the text made Ethan's skin prickle despite himself. I'm writing this because someone needs to know. I've been driving Route 56 for 15 years. Never had problems until 3 months ago. There's something wrong with the stretch between mile markers 107 and 112. People have been disappearing. Truckers mostly. They find the vehicles abandoned. Never the drivers. It starts with radio interference. Then you'll see him, a man standing on the shoulder, waving for help. Do not stop. If you look closely, you'll notice he has no face. Just smooth skin where features should be. If you see him, keep driving. If you stop, he will remember you. And once he remembers you, he will follow you home. This is my last warning. I'm taking Route 56 tonight because I don't have a choice. But I know what waits for me there. If you're reading this, just do what I say. Stay away from Route 56. The post ended there. Several replies followed, most dismissing it as nonsense or asking questions that went unanswered. The thread died after a month, until today when someone had replied. Anyone seen anything weird on Route 56 lately? Just got a job that'll take me through there tomorrow night. Ethan chuckled, the sound unnaturally loud in the empty cab. He'd driven past plenty of haunted stretches of highway during his 6 months on the road. Every route had its ghost stories. He clicked the reply button and typed quickly. Just another trucker legend, man. If we avoided every haunted highway, we'd never make a delivery. Besides, I'm heading down Route 56 tonight. GPS shows it's the fastest way to Denver from here. I'll wave to the faceless ghost for you. He hit send, still smiling to himself. He checked back later to see if anyone appreciated his humor. Ethan started the engine, the rumble chasing away the eerie silence. His GPS recalculated, the blue line of his route glowing softly in the darkness of the cab. According to the device, Route 56 would indeed shave nearly an hour off his drive time. Perfect. The first hour passed uneventfully, the hypnotic rhythm of the road broken only by the occasional passing car. The radio provided background noise, some late-night call-in show where the host's deep voice spoke soothingly about conspiracy theories and alien abductions. Ethan wasn't really listening until a burst of static cut through the broadcast. The radio crackled, hissed, then went silent for a moment before returning to normal. Then it happened again, louder this time. Between the bursts of static, Ethan thought he heard a voice, different from the host's, lower and somehow wrong, like someone speaking through gravel. See you coming? Ethan frowned, reaching to change the station. Nothing but static across the dial. He switched it off, preferring silence to the unsettling noise. His GPS chimed. In 2 miles, turn right onto Route 56. Ethan glanced at the device. He didn't remember Route 56 being part of his original route. He'd planned to stay on the interstate most of the way. But the GPS insisted this was faster, and who was he to argue with technology? The turn onto Route 56 came suddenly, a narrow exit that he nearly missed. The highway immediately felt different. Older, narrower, the yellow lines faded to near invisibility in places. There were no streetlights here, just the reach of his high beams cutting through a darkness that seemed somehow thicker than normal. Mile marker 103, Ethan noted aloud, the sound of his voice comforting in the silence. 4 miles to the stretch mentioned in the post. Not that he believed any of it, but still, a chill crept up his spine as the numbers climbed higher. Mile marker 104 passed. Then 105. His headlights seemed to be dimming, or maybe it was just his imagination. The darkness pressed closer against the windows of the cab. Mile marker 106. Ethan's phone buzzed in the cup holder, startling him. A notification from the forum. Someone had replied to his comment already? At this hour? He shouldn't check it while driving, but curiosity gnawed at him. At the next straight stretch, he glanced down quickly at the screen. You shouldn't have replied, I warned you. Ethan frowned. That wasn't the username of the original poster. Before he could think about it further, his radio suddenly switched itself back on, a blast of static so loud he jumped in his seat. Through the noise came that voice again, clearer now. I see you, Ethan. Mile marker 110. Ethan's breath came in short, desperate gasps. His hands were slick with sweat on the wheel. It's not real, he told himself. It's not real. I'm tired. I'm hallucinating. Something thumped against the side of the truck, a heavy impact that rocked the entire vehicle. Ethan shouted in terror, struggling to keep control as the truck fishtailed momentarily. Mile marker 111. Almost through. Almost safe. His headlights dimmed again, this time failing completely. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. The truck coasted in darkness, slowing rapidly. No, no, no. Ethan cried, turning the key frantically. The engine made a dying whine but wouldn't catch. As the truck rolled to a stop, Ethan realized with horror that he was exactly at mile marker 112. Order of the cursed stretch. So close. In the sudden silence, he could hear something moving outside. Footsteps circling the truck, slow and deliberate. His phone screen lit up with a final message. You shouldn't have replied, too late. I see you now. Tap, tap, tap. Something sharp against his window. Ethan couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His body was frozen in primal terror as he slowly turned toward the sound. A hand pressed against the glass, pale, with unnaturally long fingers. Behind it, barely visible in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, was that featureless face, leaning close to the window. The glass began to frost over, ice crystals spreading from where the hand touched. Through the forming ice, Ethan watched in horror as something like a mouth split open in that blank face, a jagged tear revealing nothing but darkness within. A voice whispered, somehow inside the cab now, inside his head, "Let me in, Ethan. Let me in. I have something to show you. Something wonderful." His door handle jiggled, the lock clicking open by itself. With the last of his courage, Ethan lunged across the cab, locking the passenger door just as that one had unlocked. But the game continued. Each lock he secured would immediately be followed by another unlocking somewhere else on the truck. "You can't keep me out forever," the voice whispered. "No one ever does." Through his panic, Ethan remembered his phone. With shaking hands he grabbed it, planning to call 911. The screen lit up, but instead of his normal display, it showed only the forum thread. New replies were appearing, one after another, too fast to read. All from users who had apparently encountered the same entity. All of them begging for help. All of them posted years ago. The temperature in the cab plummeted. Ethan's breath came out in white clouds. The thing outside was systematically trying each lock, each handle. The windows were now completely frosted over, trapping him in a white, icy tomb. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The locks fell silent. The frost began to recede. The temperature slowly rose. Had it given up? Ethan held his breath, listening intently. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came from the roof of the cab, directly above his head. Slow, methodical. Something was up there now. Tap, tap, tap. Moving toward the windshield. A crack appeared in the glass, spreading like a spider web from a central point of impact. Through the fracturing windshield, Ethan saw that featureless face hanging upside down, peering in at him. The tear that served as its mouth widened in what might have been a smile. "I have so many faces now, Ethan," it whispered. "So many faces I've collected. Would you like to see them?" The windshield shattered inward, a cascade of glass fragments raining down. Cold air rushed into the cab, carrying with it a smell like old meat and wet soil. Spindly arms reached through the opening, impossibly long and jointed in too many places. Fingers like needles grasped at him. Ethan screamed, scrambling backward, but there was nowhere to go. The thing pulled itself inside, unfolding like some terrible origami creation, its body contorting in ways that defied anatomy. Its blank face hovered inches from Ethan's. Then, like a terrible magic trick, the featureless skin began to peel away, revealing another face beneath, human, terrified, the eyes wide and pleading. Then that face peeled away too, revealing another and another, a horrific slideshow of stolen identities. "Do you recognize any of them?" the creature asked, its voice changing with each new face. "They all stopped on Route 56. They all replied when they shouldn't have. Just like you, Ethan. Just like you." A hand clamped over Ethan's mouth, silencing his screams. Another pressed against his forehead, cold as ice and burning like fire. "I'm going to take your face now," the thing whispered, its voice almost gentle. "But don't worry. You'll still get to see through these eyes. You'll watch as I wear your skin, as I drive your truck, as I live your life. You'll be with me forever, part of my collection. Isn't that nice? You'll never be alone again." The last thing Ethan saw was his own reflection in the rearview mirror, his face becoming smooth, featureless, empty, before darkness claimed him. 3 days later, Ethan's truck arrived at its destination in Denver, right on schedule. The delivery manager noted that the driver seemed different, quieter, stiffer in his movements, but the paperwork was in order, and that was all that mattered. As Ethan climbed back into his truck, he pulled out his phone and opened the trucker's forum. A new driver had posted about taking Route 56 tonight, asking if the old stories were true. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing a response. "It's just another trucker legend. Route 56 is perfectly safe. I drive it all the time." He hit send, a tear-like split widening across his featureless face. Then he started the engine and headed back toward Route 56. Someone new would be coming down that road tonight. Someone who wouldn't heed the warnings. Someone who would stop when they saw a familiar figure waving for help. A trucker named Ethan. And the collection would grow one face at a time.